The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of Tulsa's only hotel, and Fletcher O'Brien watched from the shade of the saloon porch as a woman emerged wearing a traveling dress so covered in red Oklahoma dust that its original color was anyone's guess. What caught his attention wasn't her disheveled appearance or the way she moved with careful precision despite obvious exhaustion, but the way she gripped the handle of a battered trunk with white knuckles as the driver tried to help her with it. "Madam, I can carry that for you," the driver offered, reaching for the trunk. "No." Her voice cut through the afternoon heat sharp as a knife. "I'll manage it myself." Fletcher pushed off the post he'd been leaning against and crossed the dusty street. The woman was struggling with the trunk, which looked heavy enough to contain a small arsenal, dragging it inch by stubborn inch toward the hotel steps. Her dark blonde hair was coming loose from its pins, and sweat tracked clean lines down her dust-covered face. "That looks like it could use 2 people," Fletcher said, keeping his voice easy and non-threatening. She looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, and for a moment he saw something raw flash across her face before she composed herself. "I appreciate the offer, but I handle my own belongings. Not questioning your capability, just offering assistance." He gestured at the trunk. "That thing must weigh near as much as a calf. Then I'm getting excellent exercise." She turned back to her task, but he could see her arms trembling with the effort. Fletcher studied her for a long moment. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't set in such determined lines. There was something about her that spoke of recent hardship, the kind that settled into a person's bones and changed the way they looked at the world. "I'm Fletcher O'Brien," he said, not moving to help since she clearly didn't want it. "I run cattle about 15 miles south of here. Been coming into Tulsa since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." She paused in her struggle, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "Clara Vaughn, I arrived from Missouri." "Welcome to Oklahoma Territory, Miss Vaughn. It's not Missouri, but it has its charms." "Mrs. Vaughn," she corrected quietly, then seemed to regret the clarification immediately. Fletcher noticed she wore no ring, but he didn't comment on it. "My apologies, Mrs. Vaughn. That trunk have something valuable in it." "Reason I ask is Tulsa's generally safe, but we get drifters passing through regular. It's personal." The words came out flat, final. He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. The hotel's run by Martha Grimsby. She's honest and keeps clean rooms. If you need anything while you're staying in town, most folks can point you my direction." Clara managed to drag the trunk up 1 step, then 2. Fletcher had to physically restrain himself from helping. Whatever was in that trunk, and whatever had brought her to Tulsa with nothing but the clothes on her back and that 1 piece of luggage, she clearly needed to feel in control of it. "Thank you, Mr. O'Brien." She didn't look at him as she spoke. All her concentration focused on conquering the hotel steps. He touched the brim of his hat and walked back across the street, but he couldn't help glancing back once. Clara Vaughn had made it to the top of the steps and was pushing through the hotel door, that trunk scraping along behind her like an anchor. The next morning, Fletcher had business at the general store. Jim Patterson, who ran the place, was measuring out flour when Fletcher walked in. "Saw you talking to that woman who came in yesterday," Jim said without preamble. The man loved gossip more than his own wife did, just being neighborly. "Martha says she paid for a week in advance. Cash money. Said she's looking for work." Jim leaned over the counter, lowering his voice though they were alone in the store. "Also said the woman wouldn't let her in the room while she was settling in. Made Martha wait in the hallway until that trunk was situated just so." Fletcher picked up a bag of coffee beans, examining them with more attention than they deserved. Woman's entitled to her privacy. Mighty protective of that trunk is all I'm saying. Makes a person wonder. Maybe it's got her wedding dress and she's sentimental, Fletcher said mildly. Maybe it's got her grandmother's china. Maybe it's none of our business. Jim sniffed. You're probably right. Still curious, though. Fletcher was about to respond when the store door opened and Clara Vaughn walked in. She'd cleaned up considerably, wearing a simple gray dress that had seen better days but was neat and pressed. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and in the morning light filtering through the store windows, Fletcher could see she was younger than he'd first thought, and prettier too, with delicate features that seemed at odds with the steel in her bearing. "Good morning," she said, her voice polite but distant. "Morning, Mrs. Vaughn," Jim said, his curiosity practically radiating off him. "What can I do for you? I'm looking for employment. The hotel owner mentioned you might know of opportunities in town." Jim scratched his chin. "Well now, what kind of work you looking for? Anything honest? I can cook, clean, sew, keep books. I'm a hard worker and quick to learn." Fletcher watched her as she spoke. There was a quiet desperation under her composed exterior, the kind that came from having limited options and knowing it. "Don't know of anything off the top of my head," Jim said slowly. "Maybe the restaurant could use help, or there's always laundry work, though that doesn't pay much. I'll try the restaurant. Thank you." Clara turned to leave, then paused. "Do you sell locks here?" Jim perked up at this. "What kind of lock you need?" "A good one, strong." She hesitated. "For a trunk?" "I've got a few. Let me show you what I have." Jim disappeared into the back room. Clara stood near the counter, her posture rigid. Fletcher cleared his throat softly. "The restaurant's called the Prairie Rose. It's run by a widow named Helen Carson. She's fair if you're looking for a recommendation on who to work for." Clara glanced at him, and for a moment her expression softened slightly. "Thank you, you're very kind." "Just trying to be helpful." He paused, weighing his words. "Tulsa's a good town. People here look out for each other, mostly. You'll do all right." "I hope so." The words were barely a whisper, and he saw her hand unconsciously move to her left ring finger, where a band had clearly been recently removed based on the pale line of skin. Jim returned with 3 different locks, displaying them on the counter with the pride of a jeweler showing off diamonds. Clara examined each one carefully before selecting the largest and heaviest. "This one. How much?" After completing her purchase, she left quickly. Jim immediately turned to Fletcher with raised eyebrows. "Another lock. What in blazes does she have in that trunk?" "Her business, Jim. Leave it alone." But Fletcher found himself wondering too as he finished his shopping and headed back to his ranch. He'd been running his small cattle operation for 5 years now, ever since his father died and left him the land. At 28, he was considered a good catch by the local mothers with unmarried daughters, but he'd never felt compelled to marry. His life was simple, predictable, and mostly satisfying. He had his cattle, his horse, his dog, and his small but sturdy ranch house. He didn't need complications, yet something about Clara Vaughn stuck in his mind as he rode home across the rolling Oklahoma prairie. The way she'd looked when she said she hoped she'd do all right, like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. The mystery of that trunk. The absence of a husband despite her use of the title Mrs. 3 days later, Fletcher had reason to return to town for supplies he'd forgotten. He stopped by the Prairie Rose for lunch and found Clara working there, moving between tables with practiced efficiency. She wore a simple apron over her gray dress, and her face was flushed from the heat of the kitchen. She recognized him when she came to take his order, and something flickered in her eyes. "Mr. O'Brien, what can I get you? What's good today? The beef stew is fresh, and Helen makes excellent cornbread. I'll take that and coffee." She nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Fletcher watched other diners as he waited. The restaurant was busy, filled with ranch hands, townspeople, and a few travelers. Clara moved among them like a ghost, there but not really present, doing her job with competence but no warmth. When she brought his food, he said, "Looks like you found work quick." Helen needed help. I was fortunate. She set down the plate and turned to go. "Mrs. Vaughn, would you sit for a moment? You look like you could use a rest." "I'm working." "And you're entitled to a break." "Helen's not a slave driver." He gestured at the empty seat across from him. Clara hesitated, glancing back at the kitchen, then slowly sat down on the very edge of the chair, ready to bolt at any moment. "How are you settling in?" Fletcher asked, cutting into his cornbread. "Well enough." Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. "Tulsa treating you right?" "Yes." He tried a different approach. "What brought you to Oklahoma Territory, if you don't mind me asking?" Her jaw tightened. "A need for a fresh start. Missouri too full of memories." She looked at him sharply, and he saw pain flash across her face before she locked it down. "Something like that. I apologize if I'm prying, just making conversation." Clara was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer. "My husband died 8 months ago. I had nothing left keeping me in Missouri, and I heard there were opportunities out west. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She didn't sound particularly mournful, which he found interesting. Before he could respond, she stood up abruptly. "I need to get back to work." He watched her go, filing away this new information. A widow, recently bereaved, traveling alone with a mysterious trunk she guarded like treasure. The story was becoming more intriguing, not less. Over the next 2 weeks, Fletcher found excuses to come into town more often than strictly necessary. He told himself it was because he'd been neglecting errands, or because he needed to check on a horse he was thinking of buying, or because Jim had mentioned getting in a new shipment of tools. The truth was harder to admit. He was drawn to Clara Vaughn in a way he couldn't quite explain. He learned things about her in small increments. She was an excellent cook, according to Helen, who'd given her more responsibility in the kitchen. She kept to herself, never socializing with the other workers or customers beyond what was required. She'd taken a room at a boarding house run by a woman named Ida Thompson because it was cheaper than the hotel, but she'd insisted on a room with a sturdy lock. The trunk, according to town gossip, went everywhere with her. When she moved from the hotel to the boarding house, she'd refused all help carrying it, dragging it down the street herself, even though it clearly taxed her strength. Fletcher was having coffee at the general store one afternoon when Jim mentioned seeing Clara at the bank. "Talking to Walter Morrison about keeping something in his safe," Jim said, practically bursting with the information. But then she decided against it, said she preferred to keep her valuables with her. "You're worse than a hen in a henhouse with this gossip," Fletcher said, but without heat. "Aren't you curious? Woman comes to town with nothing but a trunk, won't let it out of her sight, won't tell anyone what's in it. It's like something out of a dime novel. It's her business. But what if it's something dangerous? What if she's on the run from the law?" Fletcher snorted. "Clara Vaughn looks about as dangerous as a church mouse. Still waters run deep, my friend. Still waters run deep." That night, Fletcher couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Clara, about the careful way she moved through the world, like she was trying not to take up too much space. About the sadness that lived behind her eyes, about that damn trunk and why it mattered so much to her. The next Sunday he saw her at church. She sat in the back row alone, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed and distant. When the service ended, she slipped out quickly, avoiding conversation. Fletcher followed her outside and caught up with her on the church steps. "Mrs. Vaughn, wait a moment." She turned, and he saw wariness in her expression. "Mr. O'Brien, I was wondering if you might let me buy you lunch." The Prairie Rose is closed on Sundays and there's a decent place on the other side of town. That's not necessary. I know it's not necessary. I'm asking because I'd enjoy your company. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing the invitation, looking for the trap. Why? The directness of the question caught him off guard. Why what? Why do you keep seeking me out? What do you want? Fletcher took off his hat, turning it in his hands. Honest answer, I don't rightly know. You seem like someone who could use a friend, and I'd like to be that if you'll let me. No ulterior motives, no expectations. Men always have expectations. I can't speak for all men, but I can speak for myself. I'm offering friendship, nothing more. You can say no if you want. I won't take offense. Clara looked down at her worn shoes, then back up at him. One lunch. But I need to check on something at my room first. The trunk? The words were out before he could stop them. Her eyes went cold. Yes, the trunk. Is that a problem? No, madam, not at all. I'll wait. They walked to the boarding house in silence. Clara went inside alone, and Fletcher waited on the porch, feeling like a fool. When she emerged 15 minutes later, some of the tension had left her shoulders. Everything all right? He asked carefully. Yes. Where did you want to eat? Lunch was awkward at first. They sat across from each other at a small table, and Clara picked at her food while Fletcher tried to make conversation. He told her about his ranch, about growing up in Oklahoma, about the cattle business. She listened politely but volunteered little about herself. Finally, in desperation, he said, You can tell me to mind my own business, but I get the feeling you're running from something. She set down her fork carefully. And if I am, then I'd say you came to the right place. Oklahoma's full of people looking for fresh starts. Nobody much cares what you left behind as long as you're honest and decent now. And if what I left behind won't stay left, there was real fear in her voice, and Fletcher felt something protective stir in his chest. Is someone following you? I don't know. Maybe. I hope not. She pressed her fingers to her temples. I'm sorry. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have come, Clara. He used her first name without thinking. Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone. She looked at him with those storm cloud eyes, and he saw her wavering. Then she shook her head. You don't know what you're offering, so tell me. But she stood up, leaving her meal half-eaten. Thank you for lunch, Mr. O'Brien. Please don't follow me anymore. It's better for both of us if you keep your distance. She left quickly, and Fletcher sat there feeling like he'd just lost something he hadn't even known he wanted. He tried to respect her wishes. He really did. For a week, he stayed away from town except for absolute necessities. But Clara Vaughn had gotten under his skin in a way no woman ever had. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering if she was all right, worrying about what she was so afraid of. His foreman, an older man named Dutch who'd worked for Fletcher's father, noticed his distraction. You've been off your feed lately, Dutch said one evening as they were checking the fence line. Woman trouble, how'd you guess? You've got that look. Same one your daddy had before he married your mama. Who's the unlucky lady? Fletcher told him about Clara, about the trunk, about her warning him away. Dutch listened without interrupting, then spat tobacco juice thoughtfully. Sounds like she's got a past she's not proud of. Don't we all? Yeah, but most of us don't carry it around in a locked trunk. Dutch gave him a shrewd look. You're fixing to get involved anyway, aren't you? Probably. Then you'd better be prepared for whatever's in that trunk to become your problem too. I know. Dutch shook his head. Love makes fools of us all, boss. Just try not to get yourself killed. Fletcher went back to town the next day with a plan. Instead of seeking Clara out directly, he'd do it properly. He'd court her if she'd let him. He'd show her that she could trust him, that whatever she was hiding didn't matter to him. He found her at the Prairie Rose during the lunch rush, but he waited until she had a free moment before approaching. Mrs. Vaughn, I wonder if I could speak with you briefly." She looked tired, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen. "Mr. O'Brien, I thought I made myself clear." "You did, but I'm stubborn and I'd like to make you an offer." He spoke quickly before she could protest. "My ranch needs help. I've been doing my own cooking and cleaning since my housekeeper left last month, and I'm terrible at both. I'm offering you a job. Better pay than what you're getting here, and you'd have your own cabin on the property, completely separate from the main house. You'd have privacy and security." Clara stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I need the help, and you're good at what you do." "Because I think you'd be safer out of town if someone is looking for you. Because my ranch is 15 miles from Tulsa, and nobody comes there unless I invite them." He paused. "And because I'd sleep better at night knowing you were all right. You barely know me. Then let me get to know you. Come work for me. If it doesn't suit, you can always come back to town, but at least give it a try." She was quiet for so long he thought she'd refuse. Then she said, "I'd need to bring my trunk." "Bring whatever you want. The cabin has a root cellar with a door that locks, if that helps." Something flickered in her expression. Hope, maybe, or relief. "When would I start?" "Whenever you're ready." "I need to give Helen notice." "A week." "A week is perfect." As Fletcher rode back to his ranch that evening, he wondered what in the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Dutch was right. He was a fool. But he couldn't seem to help himself. There was something about Clara Vaughn that called to him, something beyond the mystery or even her quiet beauty. She was like a wild thing that had been hurt, wary and watchful, and he wanted nothing more than to show her she could be safe with him. The week passed slowly. Fletcher prepared the cabin, which was small but sturdy, built for the foreman before Dutch had decided he preferred sleeping in the bunkhouse with the other hands. Fletcher cleaned it thoroughly, fixed a broken window, and made sure the lock on the root cellar door was solid. He bought new curtains and a warm quilt for the bed. He wanted her to feel comfortable, safe. Dutch watched these preparations with amusement. "You know the hands are going to talk. Let them talk. They're going to assume she's your woman. Then I'll set them straight. She's an employee, nothing more." "Sure, boss. Whatever you say." On the appointed day, Fletcher rode into Tulsa with a wagon to collect Clara and her belongings. He found her waiting outside the boarding house with that damn trunk beside her and one small carpet bag. That was it. Everything she owned in the world. "Is this all?" he asked, climbing down from the wagon. "This is all." He loaded the trunk carefully, noting how heavy it was. Clara watched him like a hawk, ready to intervene if he so much as jostled it wrong. Once everything was secure, he helped her up onto the wagon seat. The ride to the ranch was quiet. Clara sat stiffly beside him, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the prairie stretching out in all directions. It was late May, and the grassland was green and dotted with wildflowers. The sky was huge and blue, broken only by a few wispy clouds. "It's beautiful," she said softly, almost to herself. "Wait until you see sunset. Sky turns colors you wouldn't believe. I think I'd like that." The ranch came into view gradually. First the windmill, then the main house and barn, then the corral and outbuildings. It wasn't large by Texas standards, but it was prosperous and well kept. Cattle dotted the nearby pastures, and Fletcher's horse grazed in a paddock near the barn. "That's the main house," Fletcher said, pointing. "And that smaller building to the left is your cabin. You'll have complete privacy. I'll show you around, then leave you to settle in." He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk to the cabin, setting it carefully where she indicated. The cabin was simple but comfortable. One main room with a bed, table, chairs, and a small stove, plus the root cellar accessed by a door in the floor. "The root cellar stays cool year-round," Fletcher explained. "Good for storing food or whatever else you want to keep down there." Clara knelt and opened the door, peering down into the small cellar. She tested the lock, then looked up at him with something like gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you. This is perfect. Your duties will be cooking meals for me and the hands, general housekeeping in the main house, and laundry when needed. You'll have Sundays off, and if you want to go into town, just let me know and I'll take you or send someone with you." "Why would I need someone with me?" "It's a long walk and there's occasionally trouble on the road. Drifters, sometimes hostile Indians further west, though they usually don't come this far east anymore. Just being cautious." She nodded slowly. "I understand. If you need anything, I'm just across the yard. Don't hesitate to ask." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'm glad you're here, Clara. I hope you won't regret it." "I won't." That first week was an adjustment for both of them. Clara was an excellent cook, and the hands were thrilled to have proper meals again instead of Fletcher's attempts at food. She was efficient and quiet, moving through her duties with the same careful precision she applied to everything else. She kept the house spotlessly clean, had his laundry done and folded before he even realized it needed doing, and never complained about the work. But she remained distant, keeping herself separate from everyone on the ranch. She ate her meals alone in her cabin. She declined invitations to join the hands for evening card games. When Fletcher tried to make conversation, her responses were polite but minimal. The trunk, as far as he could tell, lived in her root cellar now. He'd seen her checking on it multiple times a day at first, though she seemed to relax slightly as the days passed without incident. One evening, about 2 weeks after she'd arrived, Fletcher knocked on her cabin door after supper. "Come in," she called. He entered to find her sitting at her small table, mending one of his shirts by lamplight. She'd let her hair down and it fell past her shoulders in waves. She looked younger this way and softer. "You don't have to do that," he said, gesturing at the shirt. "Mending's not part of your duties." "I don't mind. It needed doing." She set down her needle. "Was there something you needed?" "I thought you might like to take a walk. It's a nice evening and you've been cooped up all day." She hesitated, and he could see the refusal forming. "Just a walk, Clara. No ulterior motives, I promise." "All right, let me get my shawl." They walked toward the pastures, the evening air cooling after the heat of the day. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, just as Fletcher had promised. "You were right about the sunsets," Clara said quietly. "This is a good one. Sometimes they're even better." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following the fence line. Finally, Clara spoke. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Fletcher considered the question carefully. "Because you seem like you need kindness. Because I like you. Because I want to. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done. So tell me." She stopped walking, turning to face him. In the fading light, her eyes looked darker, haunted. "What if I'm not who you think I am? What if I'm not a good person? I've been around long enough to be a fair judge of character. You're a good person, Clara. I'd stake money on it. You don't know what's in the trunk." "I don't care what's in the trunk. You should." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Fletcher took a step closer. "Is it something illegal? Something stolen?" "No." "Is it something that's going to bring danger to my ranch?" "I hope not. I've been so careful. I made sure I wasn't followed. I checked and rechecked. But I can't be certain, and that terrifies me." "Who are you afraid of, Clara?" She wrapped her arms around herself, and he could see her trembling. "My husband's family. They're wealthy, powerful. They think I stole from them and they want it back." "Did you steal from them?" "No, but that doesn't matter to them. They've convinced themselves I did, and they won't stop looking until they find me." Fletcher absorbed this information. "What do they think you took?" Clara shook her head. "I can't tell you. The less you know, the safer you are. Let me help you." "You can't. Try me." She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw fear and longing and something that might have been hope. If I tell you, everything changes. You'll either think I'm a thief and send me away, or you'll get involved in something that could destroy you. Or I'll understand and we'll figure it out together. Why would you do that? Why would you risk yourself for me? Fletcher reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. She didn't flinch. Because somewhere along the way I started caring about you. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. Because I think you've been alone for too long, carrying a burden that's too heavy for one person. Tears welled in her eyes. Fletcher, I'm so tired. I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of looking over my shoulder. But I don't know how to stop. Then let me help you. Whatever's in that trunk, whatever your husband's family thinks you took, we'll deal with it together. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. The tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. Fletcher pulled her gently into his arms, and after a moment of resistance, she collapsed against him, sobbing. He held her while she cried, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soothing nonsense. She felt small and fragile against him, nothing like the steel-willed woman who dragged that trunk through Tulsa alone. When the storm of tears finally passed, she pulled back, wiping her face with her hands. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. Don't apologize for being human. She laughed, but it was a broken sound. You're too good for me, Fletcher O'Brien. I'm really not. I'm just a rancher trying to make a living, but I'm a stubborn rancher and I don't give up on things I care about. I need time to think. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. They walked back to her cabin in silence. At her door, she turned to him. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me what you did. That night, Fletcher lay in bed thinking about Clara's revelation. Her husband's family thought she'd stolen something valuable enough to hunt her across state lines. Something she kept in a locked trunk. Something that terrified her enough to make her change her name and hide in Oklahoma territory. The question was, what could be valuable enough to warrant that kind of pursuit? Money. Jewels. Documents. He fell asleep still wondering and dreamed of Clara standing in an endless prairie, holding that trunk while shadowy figures closed in around her. The next few weeks brought a gradual thawing in Clara's demeanor. She still kept to herself mostly, but she began joining Fletcher for coffee in the mornings before starting her work. They'd sit on the porch of the main house and watch the sun come up, talking about small things. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother who died when she was young, about working in a dress shop before her marriage. He told her about his parents, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the dream of expanding his ranch someday. She never mentioned her husband, and Fletcher didn't push. But gradually, he was learning who Clara Vaughn was beneath the fear and secrecy. She had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard sometimes, making him laugh when he least expected it. She was kind to the ranch hands, especially young Tommy, who was only 17 and desperately homesick. She loved the prairie sunsets and would sometimes stand on her cabin porch just watching the sky change colors. She sang softly while she worked, old hymns mostly, in a voice that was surprisingly lovely. Fletcher was falling in love with her, and he knew it. The knowledge should have terrified him, but instead it felt right, like something that had been inevitable from the moment she'd stepped off that stagecoach in Tulsa. One morning in mid-July, over their usual coffee, Clara said, "Can I ask you something? Anything. Why haven't you ever married? You're 28, you have a good ranch, you're kind and decent. Surely women have been interested." Fletcher grinned. "A few. But I never felt the right connection. My parents loved each other something fierce, and I always wanted what they had. I wasn't willing to settle for less. And now," he looked at her directly, "now I think I've found someone worth fighting for, someone worth building a life with if she'll have me." Clara's breath caught, "Fletcher, you don't know what you're saying. I come with too much baggage, literally." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying I want to court you properly, Clara Vaughn. I'm saying I want to see where this goes between us. I'm saying that trunk and whatever's in it doesn't matter to me half as much as you do. What if I can't give you what you want? What if I'm too damaged, too afraid? Then we'll work through it together. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm just asking you to give us a chance." She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the prairie. Finally, she said, "My husband was not a good man, Fletcher. He was charming at first, and I was young and foolish. By the time I realized what he really was, it was too late. He hurt me in ways I'm still recovering from. His family knew what he was, but they protected him because he was blood, and I was just some shop girl he'd married in a moment of foolishness." She turned to look at him. "I'm not sure I know how to trust anymore. I'm not sure I know how to let someone in. Then we'll take it slow." "As slow as you need. I'm not going anywhere." "You keep saying that, but you don't know. His family has resources. They have investigators. If they find me, they'll come, and they won't be reasonable. Let them come. This is my land, and I protect what's mine. I'm not yours. Not yet, maybe. But I'm hoping you will be someday." Clara stood abruptly. "I need to show you something. Tonight after supper, come to my cabin. It's time you knew the truth." Fletcher's heart pounded. All right. The day passed slowly. Fletcher tried to focus on his work, but kept finding his mind wandering to what Clara might show him that evening. By the time supper was finished and the hands had dispersed to their various evening activities, he was wound tight with anticipation and nervousness. He knocked on Clara's cabin door just as the sun was setting. She opened it immediately, like she'd been waiting right there. "Come in. Close the door." Her cabin was lit by several lamps, bright enough to see clearly. The floor door to the root cellar was open, and the trunk sat beside it, its locks undone. "Before I show you," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly, "I need you to understand the whole story. Will you listen?" "Of course." She gestured for him to sit at her table, and she sat across from him, her hands folded tightly. "My husband was Robert Vaughn. His family owns half of Kansas City. Banks, railroads, property. They're obscenely wealthy and used to getting their way. Robert was their golden son, handsome and charming and utterly rotten inside." She took a shaky breath. "He married me when I was 19. I thought I was the luckiest girl alive. Within a month, I learned the truth. He drank heavily. When he drank, he became violent. I was too ashamed to tell anyone, and his family made it clear that if I left or caused a scandal, they'd destroy what was left of my own family." Fletcher felt anger rising in his chest but kept silent, letting her talk. "I endured it for 4 years. 4 years of bruises hidden under long sleeves, of lies about falling downstairs, of smiling at society parties while dying inside. Then one night he came home drunker than usual. We argued. He hit me and I fought back." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He fell, hit his head on the fireplace. He died instantly." Fletcher reached across the table and took her hand. She gripped it like a lifeline. "His family claimed it was an accident to avoid scandal. They buried him quietly, but they knew the truth, or at least they suspected, and they found out about the trust fund." "Trust fund." Robert's grandmother had money separate from the family fortune. She left it all to Robert's wife, whoever that might be, with specific instructions that it was for the woman's use only and couldn't be touched by the Vaughn family. The old woman hated what her grandson had become, and this was her way of protecting whoever he married. Clara's laugh was bitter. $100,000. Robert never knew about it. His grandmother died before our marriage, and the will wasn't read until after his death. When I found out, I claimed it immediately. The family was furious." Fletcher whistled low. $100,000 was a fortune, enough to live on for several lifetimes if managed well. They tried to contest the will, but it was ironclad. The money was mine legally. So they began spreading rumors that I'd stolen from them, that the money in the trust fund was actually theirs, that I'd somehow manipulated the old woman before she died. They hired investigators to follow me, to intimidate me, to try to catch me doing something illegal so they could have me arrested. I lived in fear for months until I couldn't take it anymore. I withdrew the money in cash and bonds, put it in that trunk, and ran. She stood and walked to the trunk, opening it fully. Inside, Fletcher saw neat stacks of bills and official-looking documents, all packed carefully. "This is my freedom, Fletcher. This is my chance at a new life, but it's also a target on my back. If the Vaughn family finds me, they'll accuse me of theft. They have enough influence to make it stick, to have me arrested and probably convicted. At the very least, they'll tie the money up in legal proceedings for years while I rot in jail." Fletcher stood and walked to the trunk, looking down at the contents. It was more money than he'd ever seen in one place. He understood now why she'd guarded it so fiercely, why she'd been so afraid. You killed your husband in self-defense, and you took money that was legally yours. You've done nothing wrong. Try telling that to the Vaughn family. Try telling that to a judge they've bought and paid for. Fletcher closed the trunk gently and turned to face her. "Then we make sure they don't find you. It's not your fight." "Yes, it is. Because I love you, Clara. I've been falling in love with you since the day you stepped off that stagecoach. I love your strength and your courage and the way you smile when you think no one's watching. I love how you sing while you work and how you're patient with Tommy, even when he's being dense. I love that you've been to hell and back, but you're still standing, still fighting." He took her hands in his. "I love you, and I'm not letting anyone hurt you or take from you what's rightfully yours." Tears streamed down her face. "How can you love me? You barely know me." "I know everything I need to know. The question is, do you think you could ever love me back?" "I already do," she whispered. "That's what terrifies me. I swore I'd never give another man power over me, never trust again. But you made me break that promise without even trying." Fletcher pulled her into his arms, and this time when he kissed her, she kissed him back with a desperation that spoke of months of loneliness and fear finally finding release. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me," Fletcher said. Clara laughed through her tears. "You're insane. You just found out I'm a widow with a fortune in stolen money according to a powerful family. Legally obtained money, and I'm completely sane. Marry me, Clara. Let me give you my name and my protection. As Mrs. O'Brien, you'll have legal standing if they do find you. We'll have a marriage contract drawn up saying all property you brought into the marriage remains yours. If they come, we'll fight them together with the best lawyers money can buy. Your money used to protect you the way it was meant to. Fletcher, this is too fast, too reckless. Life is short and uncertain. I learned that when my father dropped dead of a heart attack at 45. We're not promised tomorrow, so I'm not wasting today. I love you. You love me. Everything else we can figure out as we go." Clara searched his face, and whatever she saw there seemed to convince her. "You're sure? You really want to tie yourself to my mess?" "I'm absolutely certain. In fact, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "Then yes. Yes, I'll marry you, you crazy, wonderful man." They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Tulsa. It was a small ceremony with Dutch and Helen Carson as witnesses, held in the church with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Clara wore a simple blue dress, the nicest one she owned, and Fletcher wore his Sunday suit. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her gently, and for the first time since he'd met her, Clara looked genuinely happy. They had a celebratory dinner at the Prairie Rose with Dutch, Helen, and a few of the ranch hands, then rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting. Fletcher carried Clara over the threshold of the main house, both of them laughing. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Brien," he said, setting her down gently. "It still doesn't feel real," she admitted. 3 months ago I was hiding in Kansas City, terrified. Now I'm married to a rancher in Oklahoma Territory. If you're having second thoughts, it's too late. You're stuck with me now." "No second thoughts, just disbelief at my good fortune." She touched his face gently. "You saved me, Fletcher. We saved each other. I was getting set in my ways, turning into a cantankerous old bachelor. You gave me something to live for beyond cattle and land." That night, Fletcher was patient and gentle, letting Clara set the pace. Her first marriage had left scars, and he was determined to show her that intimacy could be loving instead of frightening. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest. "Thank you for being kind," she whispered. "Always." He kissed the top of her head. "We'll take things at whatever speed you need. There's no rush." "I think I might be happy," she said, wonder in her voice. "I didn't think I'd ever feel happy again." "Get used to it. I plan to make you happy for a very long time." The next few months passed in a golden haze of newlywed bliss. Clara blossomed under the security of marriage and Fletcher's steady affection. She smiled more, laughed more, relaxed in ways he hadn't seen before. The trunk, its contents now safely deposited in the Tulsa bank under Clara's name with ironclad instructions, no longer loomed over her like a threat. They fell into an easy rhythm together. Clara still cooked and kept house, but now she did it as mistress of her own home rather than an employee. She began making changes, adding curtains and rugs, planting a garden. Fletcher loved coming home to find her there, loved the way she'd light up when he walked through the door. They talked about the future, about expanding the ranch, maybe building a larger house someday when children came along. Clara was cautious about the idea of children at first. "What if I'm like him?" she'd asked one night. "What if there's something broken in me that makes me a bad mother?" "You're nothing like him," Fletcher had assured her. "You're kind and patient and loving. You'll be a wonderful mother when the time comes." It was late October when trouble arrived in the form of 2 men in expensive suits who rode up to the ranch house on equally expensive horses. Fletcher was out checking the herd, but Clara was home alone, hanging laundry. When she saw them, her face went white. She was standing frozen in the yard when Fletcher came riding up, having been alerted by Tommy, who'd seen the strangers and fetched the boss immediately. Fletcher dismounted and positioned himself between Clara and the men. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The older of the two, a gray-haired man with cold eyes, spoke. "We're looking for Clara Vaughn. We have reason to believe she's in this area." "Don't know anyone by that name," Fletcher said evenly. "No, we heard she was working at a restaurant in Tulsa. When we went there, the owner said she'd left to work on a ranch." "Your ranch, Mr. O'Brien." "My wife used to work in Tulsa, but her name's Clara O'Brien. Perhaps you're confused." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your wife? How convenient. When did this marriage take place?" "Don't see how that's your business." "It's very much our business. Clara Vaughn stole a substantial amount of money from her deceased husband's family. We're here to retrieve it and take her back to Kansas City to face charges." Fletcher kept his voice calm despite the anger building in his chest. "As I said, I don't know any Clara Vaughn. My wife is Clara O'Brien. She brought no money into our marriage except her personal savings. If you have legal business, I suggest you speak to a lawyer." "We can get the sheriff involved if you prefer," the second man said, speaking for the first time. He was younger, with a cruel twist to his mouth that reminded Fletcher uncomfortably of how Clara had described her dead husband. "You do that. Sheriff Patterson in Tulsa is a reasonable man. He'll tell you the same thing I am. Clara O'Brien is my wife, and she's done nothing wrong. Clara found her voice finally. James, Philip. She addressed them by name, and Fletcher felt her hand touch his back lightly. I took nothing that wasn't legally mine. Judge Anderson confirmed the will was valid. The money was left to me specifically, and I claimed it according to law. You murdered my brother, the younger man, Philip, spat. You think we don't know the truth? You killed him and took the money. Your brother died in an accident after attacking me. The coroner ruled it accidental death, and no charges were filed. You're rewriting history to suit your narrative. That money belongs to the Vaughn family, James said. My mother's will was the product of senility and manipulation. We'll prove it in court. Fletcher had heard enough. Get off my land. If you want to pursue legal action, do it through proper channels. But you don't come to my ranch and threaten my wife. This is Oklahoma territory, and we handle things differently here than in Kansas City. Is that a threat, Mr. O'Brien? It's a fact. Now leave. The two men exchanged glances. Finally, James said, This isn't over. We'll be back with the proper authorities. Then bring them. Until then, you're trespassing. They rode off slowly, clearly wanting to maintain some dignity. Fletcher kept his hand on his rifle until they were out of sight, then turned to Clara. She was shaking. They found me. I knew they would eventually, but I'd hoped for more time. It's all right. We'll handle it. You don't understand. They have money and influence. They can make life very difficult. Then we'll make it more difficult for them. Tomorrow we're going to Tulsa to see a lawyer. We're going to make sure every document is in order, that your claim to that money is bulletproof. And we're going to prepare for a fight if they bring one. Clara looked up at him with frightened eyes. What if they take me back? What if they separate us? Fletcher pulled her into his arms. That's not going to happen. You're my wife. You're under my protection, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take you from me. The next day, they met with Walter Morrison, the most respected lawyer in Tulsa. He listened to their story carefully, examined the documents Clara had brought, and finally sat back in his chair. The will is legitimate. The coroner's report clearly states accidental death. You have marriage certificates and bank records showing proper procedures were followed. Legally, you're in the clear, Mrs. O'Brien. But they're claiming she manipulated the old woman, Fletcher said. Can they make that stick? It would be difficult. The will was written years before Mrs. O'Brien even met Robert Vaughn. There's no way she could have influenced it. The Vaughn family is likely counting on you being intimidated into returning the money rather than fighting them in court. That's not going to happen, Fletcher said firmly. Walter nodded approvingly. Good. Then here's what we'll do. I'll file preemptive paperwork establishing your legal claim to the inheritance and your current status as Mrs. Fletcher O'Brien, resident of Oklahoma Territory. If they want to challenge it, they'll have to do so in court here, not in Kansas City where they have influence. We'll also document any harassment or threats they make. If they step out of line, we'll hit them with counter-suits. Will it be enough? Clara asked quietly. Honestly, probably. Fighting a legal battle this far from their sphere of influence, against a legitimate will and a woman who's now married with protected assets, would cost them a fortune with little chance of success. My guess is they'll bluster and threaten, but ultimately back down when they realize you're not an easy target. Clara gripped Fletcher's hand tightly. I hope you're right. Over the next few weeks, James and Philip Vaughn made nuisances of themselves. They stayed at the Tulsa hotel, asked pointed questions around town, and tried to dig up dirt on both Fletcher and Clara. But Tulsa residents, having taken a liking to the couple, stonewalled them. Jim at the general store claimed not to remember Clara working at the restaurant. Helen Carson said she'd only known Clara as Mrs. O'Brien. Even the sheriff, when questioned, confirmed that Clara O'Brien was a respected member of the community and her husband a solid citizen. Frustrated, the Vaughns tried a different approach. One afternoon, Fletcher was in town when he was approached by Philip Vaughn. "O'Brien, let's talk man to man." Fletcher crossed his arms. "I'm listening. You seem like a reasonable person who's gotten caught up in something that's not his fault. My family is willing to make this easy. You convince Clara to return $50,000, half of what she took, and we'll drop everything. She can keep the rest and we'll leave you both in peace." Interesting offer, except for the part where she didn't take anything that wasn't hers. Come on, you're a rancher. You understand the value of a dollar. Surely you can see that keeping $50,000 and avoiding a legal battle is better than gambling everything on a court case. What I see is a family trying to bully a woman who had the misfortune of marrying your piece of garbage brother. What I see is you trying to steal what a dying woman wanted her to have. So here's my counter-offer. You get on your horses, ride back to Kansas City, and never bother my wife again. Philip's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. No, I'm making a choice. And that choice is to protect my wife from people like you. We could make life very difficult for you. Business deals that fall through, cattle buyers who suddenly don't want to do business with you, banks that won't extend credit. Fletcher stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. And I could make life very difficult for you. This is the West, friend. We don't take kindly to threats, especially against women. You keep pushing, and you might find Oklahoma Territory isn't as civilized as you think. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Philip turned and walked away. That night, Fletcher told Clara about the conversation. She was upset but not surprised. They won't give up easily. They've convinced themselves they're in the right. Let them think what they want. Walter says the law is on our side. The law hasn't always protected me before. Fletcher took her hands in his. I will always protect you. I promise you that, no matter what it takes. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, wishing he could shield her from every bad thing in the world. The situation came to a head 2 weeks later. Fletcher was working in the barn when he heard shouting from the house. He ran across the yard to find James Vaughn inside, having apparently pushed past Clara when she answered the door. "Get out of my house," Fletcher said, his voice deadly quiet. "Not until we settle this. I'm tired of playing games. Clara, you're going to return that money or I swear I'll destroy everything you've built here." Clara stood against the wall, pale but composed. "You have no power here, James. You're just a bitter man who can't accept that your mother saw through your family's corruption. That senile old woman had no right to give away Vaughn money to some nobody shopgirl." Fletcher moved fast, grabbing James by the collar and shoving him toward the door. "I said get out. Touch my wife, threaten her again, and the sheriff will be the least of your problems." James stumbled but caught himself. "You'll regret this, both of you. The only thing I regret is not throwing you out sooner. You've got 1 minute to get off my property or I'm getting my rifle." James left, but his parting look promised retribution. Clara collapsed into a chair once he was gone. "This is never going to end, is it? They're never going to leave us alone." Fletcher knelt beside her. "Then we make them. Tomorrow we're going back to Walter. We're going to file harassment charges and get a court order keeping them away from our property. We're going to fight this properly, legally, and we're going to win." Walter Morrison took their complaint seriously. Within 3 days, he'd filed paperwork with both the local court and back in Kansas City, documenting the Vaughn family's harassment and demanding they cease and desist. He also filed a counterclaim on Clara's behalf, seeking damages for emotional distress and slander. "This should get their attention," Walter said. Fighting a two-front legal battle, with the very real possibility of their harassment becoming public record, might be enough to make them reconsider. He was right. A week later, Walter received a letter from a lawyer representing the Vaughn family. They were withdrawing their claim and would no longer pursue Clara for the inheritance money, provided she signed a document agreeing never to seek further contact with the family or make public statements about Robert Vaughn's death. "It's a face-saving measure," Walter explained. "They want to close this quietly." Clara read the document carefully. "If I sign this, it's really over. They'll leave us alone. According to this, yes. You'd be agreeing to mutual non-contact. They can't come after you and you can't go after them. I have no desire to ever see them again." "Where do I sign?" After the paperwork was filed and confirmed, Clara seemed to finally relax completely. The fear that had lived in her eyes since Fletcher met her gradually faded. She laughed more freely, slept more soundly, and began to truly embrace her life as Clara O'Brien. Winter came to the Oklahoma prairie, cold and sometimes harsh, but the ranch house was warm and filled with love. Clara and Fletcher fell deeper into their relationship, learning each other's habits and quirks, building a foundation of trust and affection that grew stronger each day. On a snowy evening in January, Clara sat by the fire doing needlework while Fletcher read. She set down her sewing and looked at him thoughtfully. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For saving me. For believing in me when you had no reason to. For fighting for me when it would have been easier to just let me go." Fletcher set down his book and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "You saved me too, you know. I was half alive before you came, just going through the motions. You made me remember what it feels like to care about someone, to build something meaningful. I love you, Fletcher O'Brien, more than I thought I could ever love anyone. I love you too, Clara O'Brien, today, tomorrow, and every day after that." She kissed him softly. "I want to use some of the money." "For what?" "I want to expand the ranch, buy more land, more cattle, build that bigger house we talked about, fill it with children and laughter and all the things I never thought I'd have." She smiled. "I want to build a life that's so full and rich that the past becomes just a distant memory." "That sounds perfect. When do we start?" "Spring, when the weather clears and everything's possible again." Fletcher pulled her close, imagining that future. A bigger ranch, a house filled with children, years stretching ahead of them filled with love and purpose. It was more than he'd ever dared to dream, and it was all because a mysterious woman with a locked trunk had stepped off a stagecoach in Tulsa one hot May afternoon. Spring came eventually, as it always did, turning the prairie green and dotted with wildflowers. True to her word, Clara used a portion of her inheritance to buy adjacent land, expanding the ranch by a third. They hired more hands, bought better breeding stock, and began planning their new house. Clara discovered she was pregnant in April, and Fletcher thought his heart might burst with joy. She glowed with happiness, her hand constantly resting on her still flat stomach as if protecting the life growing there. "I'm going to be a father," Fletcher said wonderingly one evening. "Are you ready?" Clara asked, smiling. "I've never been more ready for anything. Though I have to admit, I'm terrified of doing it wrong. We'll figure it out together. That seems to be our way." Construction on the new house began in May, on the one-year anniversary of Clara's arrival in Tulsa. It would be a grand structure by ranch standards. 2 stories, 6 bedrooms, a proper kitchen and dining room, and a wraparound porch. Clara supervised the design, insisting on large windows to let in light and a nursery with a view of the prairie. "I want our children to grow up knowing how beautiful the world can be," she explained. "I want them to feel safe and loved and free." The baby was born in December, a healthy boy with Fletcher's dark hair and Clara's gray eyes. They named him Thomas James, after Fletcher's father and Clara's father, neither of whom had lived to see this day. Fletcher held his son for the first time with tears in his eyes. "He's perfect." "Just like his father," Clara said, exhausted but radiant. Tommy, the ranch hand, was beside himself when he learned the baby shared his name. "I'll look after him, boss. Make sure he grows up right." "I'm counting on it," Fletcher said, clapping the young man on the shoulder. They moved into the new house the following spring, when Thomas was crawling and getting into everything. The house still smelled of fresh paint and new wood, but it already felt like home. Clara had furnished it beautifully, mixing pieces bought new with treasures from the Tulsa shops. Her favorite room was the library, where floor-to-ceiling bookshelves waited to be filled. "I never had books growing up," she explained. "Now our children will have all the books they could want." 2 years later, they had a daughter, Grace Elizabeth, who had her mother's blonde hair and her father's stubborn determination. Thomas adored his little sister, following her around protectively even when she was still learning to walk. The ranch prospered beyond Fletcher's dreams. Word spread about the quality of his cattle, and buyers came from as far as Texas to purchase breeding stock. The combination of Fletcher's knowledge and Clara's business acumen made them formidable partners. She kept the books, negotiated deals, and managed the growing staff with the same fierce competence she'd once applied to protecting that mysterious trunk. On a warm May evening, 6 years after Clara had arrived in Tulsa, they sat on their porch watching Thomas and Grace chase lightning bugs in the yard. The sun was setting in a spectacular display of color, and the prairie stretched endlessly before them. "You ever think about that day?" Fletcher asked. "When you first arrived, sometimes, it feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to someone else." "Do you miss Missouri at all?" Clara thought about it. "I miss the girl I was before everything went wrong, but I don't miss the place or the people. This is home now." "You're home. I'm glad you came here. Glad you dragged that trunk through town despite everyone trying to help. Glad you were stubborn and secretive and impossible," she laughed. "Are you saying you love me because I'm difficult?" "I'm saying I love you because you're strong. Because you survived things that would have broken other people. Because you took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "We turned it into something beautiful, together." Thomas came running up to the porch, breathless. "Papa, I caught 3 lightning bugs. Grace only caught 1. "That's because I let you win," Grace said indignantly, trailing behind her brother. Fletcher swooped down and picked up both children, one in each arm. "How about we let them all go and watch them fly away together?" The children agreed enthusiastically, and the family stood in the yard releasing the captured insects. They glowed briefly in the gathering darkness before disappearing into the night. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Fletcher and Clara lay in bed talking quietly. "I want to tell them someday," Clara said. "When they're old enough to understand. I want them to know that their mother ran away from a terrible situation and built a new life. I want them to know that sometimes being strong means asking for help, and that love can heal even the deepest wounds." "We'll tell them together, when the time is right. Do you think they'll understand? About the trunk, about the money, about everything? I think they'll understand that their mother is the bravest person I've ever met, and they'll be proud just like I am." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't offered me that job, if I'd stayed in town, if the Vaughns had found me before we married. But I did offer and you did accept, and we're here now. That's what matters. Still, I owe you everything. You owe me nothing. We built this life together, Clara, every bit of it. You brought the money, sure, but you also brought yourself. Your strength, your intelligence, your capacity for love despite everything you'd been through. That's worth more than any inheritance." She kissed him softly. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky. Now stop worrying about the past and help me plan the future. I was thinking we should expand the north pasture, maybe build another barn." They talked late into the night about their plans, their dreams, their children. Outside, the Oklahoma prairie stretched endlessly under a blanket of stars, and somewhere in Tulsa, the hotel where Clara had first stayed stood empty and quiet. The trunk that had once contained all her hopes and fears was long gone, its contents transformed into land and cattle and a beautiful house. But the courage it had represented, the determination to build something better despite overwhelming odds, that remained. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. The ranch grew to be one of the most successful in the territory. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the land as much as his father did. Grace became a force of nature, spirited and intelligent, with her mother's head for business and her father's kindness. 2 more children joined the family. Samuel, born when Thomas was 8, and little Margaret, who came along 4 years after that. The house that had seemed so large when they built it gradually filled with noise and life and love. Clara never quite lost the cautiousness that her first marriage had instilled, but she learned to trust. She learned that not all men were like Robert Vaughn, that strength could be gentle, that love didn't have to hurt. Fletcher made sure of that, with patience and consistency and unwavering devotion. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Clara back to Tulsa for a celebration dinner. They left the children with Dutch, who'd become like a grandfather to them, and rode into town dressed in their finest clothes. The restaurant was new, fancier than the Prairie Rose had been. Over dinner, Clara raised her glass. "To the man who saw past a locked trunk and a frightened woman to the life we could build together. To the woman who taught me that the best things in life are worth fighting for," Fletcher responded. They clinked glasses, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so happy, Fletcher. So impossibly happy. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and discover this was all a dream, not a dream, real life in all its messy, beautiful glory." He reached across the table to take her hand. "And we've got decades more of it ahead of us. Promise, I promise." "You're stuck with me, Clara O'Brien. No getting rid of me now." She laughed, and the sound was pure joy. They finished their dinner and walked through Tulsa in the evening light. The town had grown considerably in 10 years, with new shops and houses, more people, more life. They passed the hotel where Clara had first stayed, and she paused to look at it. "What are you thinking?" Fletcher asked. "I'm thinking about the woman who arrived here with nothing but a trunk and a prayer, about how scared she was, how alone she felt. And I'm thinking how glad I am that she met a stubborn cowboy who wouldn't take no for an answer. Best day of my life when you stepped off that stagecoach. Mine too, though I didn't know it then." They walked on, hand in hand, as the sun set over Oklahoma territory. The prairie wind carried the scent of grass and wildflowers, and in the distance, cattle lowed softly. It was the sound of home, of safety, of love earned and given freely. That night, lying in their hotel room, Clara said, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "If I had to do it all over again, if I had to go through every terrible thing that happened to get to this moment, I would. Because it led me to you and to our children and to this life. It was worth it, Fletcher, all of it." He pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Clara, today, tomorrow, and forever." "Forever," she echoed. "I like the sound of that." And in that moment, with her husband's arms around her and their children safe at home, Clara O'Brien was finally, completely, wholly at peace. The trunk was just a memory now, and the fear it represented had long since transformed into something beautiful. She had everything she'd never dared to dream of, and it was real, and it was hers. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges, more joys. Thomas would eventually take over running the ranch, with Grace handling the business side of things. Samuel would become a lawyer, inspired by Walter Morrison, and Margaret would marry a neighboring rancher's son, expanding their family's influence in the territory. Fletcher and Clara would live to see grandchildren born and raised, would see Oklahoma become a state, would watch their legacy grow beyond anything they'd imagined. But all of that was still to come. On this night, in this moment, they were simply Fletcher and Clara O'Brien, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The scared woman with the locked trunk had become a rancher's wife, a mother, a businesswoman, a pillar of her community. The lonely cowboy had become a husband, a father, a man whose life was rich with love and purpose. They'd taken brokenness and fear and transformed it into something whole and beautiful. They'd taken a secret locked in a trunk and turned it into land, cattle, children, and a legacy that would last generations. Most importantly, they'd taken two wounded hearts and healed them with patience, understanding, and love. It was, Fletcher thought as he drifted off to sleep with Clara in his arms, the best kind of happily ever after. Not because it was easy or perfect, but because it was real, hard-earned, and built on a foundation of trust and genuine love. They'd both been willing to fight for it, to risk everything for the chance at happiness. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the money in the trunk or the mystery it represented, but the courage it took to open it, to trust someone else with your deepest secrets and fears. Clara had taken that risk, and Fletcher had proven himself worthy of it. Together, they'd created something neither could have achieved alone. As dawn broke over the Oklahoma prairie the next morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Fletcher and Clara rode back to their ranch, eager to see their children and return to their daily lives. The mystery of the locked trunk was long resolved, but the love story it had begun continued, growing richer and deeper with each passing year. Thomas saw them coming and ran to meet them, the younger children trailing behind. Grace helped her mother down from the wagon while Samuel peppered his father with questions about town. Little Margaret, only 3 years old, simply wrapped her arms around her mother's legs and held on tight. This was what Clara had bought with that inheritance, Fletcher realized as he looked at his family gathered around them. Not just land or cattle or a fine house, but safety, security, the chance to build something good. The old woman who'd written that will, Robert Vaughn's grandmother, would have been proud to see how her gift had been used. She'd wanted to protect whoever her grandson married, and in a way she'd succeeded beyond measure. That money had been Clara's escape route, her path to freedom, and ultimately the foundation of a life filled with love. "Welcome home, Mama, Papa," Thomas said, grinning. "We missed you." "We missed you too," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "So very much." They walked together toward the house, a family complete and whole. Behind them, the sun continued its climb into the sky, promising another beautiful day in a long string of beautiful days. The locked trunk was forgotten now, just another part of their origin story, the mystery that had brought them together. But the love that had grown from that mysterious beginning continued to flourish, spreading through their family and into the community they'd built around them. It was a testament to the power of trust, the healing nature of genuine affection, and the truth that sometimes the best love stories start in the most unexpected ways. Fletcher looked at Clara, really looked at her, and saw not the frightened woman who'd arrived in Tulsa 6 years ago, but the strong, confident woman she'd become. Her eyes were bright with happiness, her smile genuine and unguarded. She'd earned her peace, earned her joy, and he was honored to be the man who stood beside her through all of it. "I love you," he said, not caring that the children could hear. "I love you too," she responded, and in those simple words was everything they'd built together, everything they'd overcome, and everything they still had to look forward to. The trunk and its secrets might have brought her to Oklahoma, but love and trust had made her stay. And in the end, that made all the difference. Their story, which had begun with mystery and fear, had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West itself, full of courage, adventure, and the kind of deep, abiding love that could weather any storm. As they walked into their home together, surrounded by their children and the life they'd built, both Fletcher and Clara knew that they'd found something rare and precious. They'd found each other, against all odds, and in doing so had found themselves. The woman with the locked trunk and the cowboy who'd married her, before learning her secrets, had created their own happily ever after, one day and one choice at a time. And it was perfect, not because it was easy, but because it was theirs.